These days, whenever we see Guts in action, we tend to worry about him more than cheer him on because of the harrowing effects of the Berserker armor. It's also because he's using the armor that we often forget just how good of a swordsman he really is. Most of his recent fights have seen him draw on the inhuman strength of his personal Onyx Omen of Death, but if you wanted a pure reminder of his skills, look no farther than his rivalry with Silat. The Bakiraka Prince first met Guts in a tournament in a far-off Tudor stronghold, but he hasn't forgotten the man since that day because, number one, Guts humiliated him, and number two, Guts forced him to rethink his own approach to battle. Silat and Guts' rivalry starts off as a clash of egos, but grows into something more akin to mutual respect, especially when it becomes clear that these guys have a mutual target in Griffith. But Silat also acts as a benchmark for Guts' swordsmanship, so we'll go into greater detail on all that and more in this video. But before we do that, we do have a very small request. If you enjoy our content, please give this video a massive thumbs up, share it with your friends, and smash that subscribe button with the notification bell turned to all. This helps us create more of the content that you love and bring in more marvelous viewers like yourself. So let's get straight into it. Guts vs. Silat Round 1, the Arrogant Prince and the Peregrinating Warrior. The first time that Guts and Silat came across each other was in chapter 41, which is significant for two reasons. The first, of course, is the fact that it was our first time seeing Guts after his year-long peregrination in the mountains. He spent that time honing his skills and discovering his purpose in life, which ended with him deciding he would become the best swordsman there can be by testing himself against other swordsmen. That's how both he and we get to the second reason chapter 41 is so significant. It's the only time we see a tournament in the entire series. Berserk is set in a medieval fantasy world. Hell, the architecture we see is predominantly European inspired, with Eastern influences only coming in when the Kushan invade Midland. And that's an important aspect to understanding this rivalry, so let's keep that in mind. But for the most part, it's a story about lords and knights, damsels in distress, and fairies that heal with pixie dust and annoy you to no end. At least from a framework perspective. So it's rather odd that the entire series has only one tournament in its nearly 400 chapter run. Even Game of Thrones managed to stuff in at least two major tourneys into the show. Granted, both of them came before the end times, but Kentaro Miura was a man known for writing and drawing things that had purpose and meaning, things that drove the story forward, as opposed to being thrown in there for the ornamentation. So it's only fitting that the one tourney he does have shows us Guts' immense progress through a melee competition. Now that we've got those ancillary details out of the way, let's talk about the action itself and the man that Guts was facing on that sunny morning in Tudor, young Master Silat. Up until this point, the two most impressive human fighters we'd seen in the series were Guts and Griffith, beyond a shadow of a doubt. General Boscon was a close third, as you'll probably know if you've seen our Why Guts vs. Boscon is the most important Golden Age fight video, and if you haven't, go check it out. But beyond these two, there weren't many out-and-out prodigious fighters in the series until Silat came around. The last time we'd seen him in action, Guts cut down 100 men in a single night and was then instrumental in helping Griffith secure the key fortress of Doldry. He had a lot of good credit with us. Silat was a brand new addition to the roster though, and his being from parts unknown gave him that aura of a mystery man showing up to show off at a local tournament. And that's exactly what he was doing when we met him during that melee competition we were talking about a few moments ago. On one side was a Tudor warrior named Valencia, whose claim to fame was killing 130 men during the 100-Year War. From a pure muscle perspective, Valencia was comparable to the heavy hitters of Berserk, your Pippins, your Bezusos, your Samsons. He fought using a giant two-handed greatsword and was armored like the Juggernaut from the Fox Marvelverse. On the other hand was Silat, dressed in cloth and leather armor, with the only metal plating on his body being a round chest piece. His headgear was a hooded turban, his boots boiled leather. He was a head shorter than Valencia and half his width. Guess who won that fight though? And we'll give you a second to answer. If your answer wasn't Silat, well, you haven't seen enough Juggernaut fights, my friends. The Eastern assassin effortlessly punks Valencia and trash talks the entire genre of Western swordplay while doing it. In his defense, he has the skills to back it up because Valencia can't land a single hit on Silat. And he tried multiple times, but his huge frame made his strikes slow, and his slashing technique was too simple and easy for Silat to not see through. The Bakiraka Prince sidestepped all of his opponent's offense and used his unique katar to counter the movement of Valencia's heavy sword. A katar is a handheld sword that can be best described as a cross between a knuckle duster and a dagger. The user grips the katar in such a way that their knuckles align with the blade, and thrusting movements are the norm with these shield breakers, though they can be used for slashing as well. A katar is a poor choice for parrying though because of how short the blade length is, but Silat's katars are modified with two smaller blades flanking the main one to create a mini trident. And we said katars because he can dual wield these bad boys with effortless ease. The first time Silat caught Valencia's sword, he yanked him aside and kicked him in the head, as if to warn him things will not be that easy the next time around. When Valencia didn't didn't give up, Silat stabbed his sword from both sides and snapped it in half like it was a twig. He told Valencia the same thing would happen to his head as the big man gave up, further cementing Silat's belief that the sword arts of these lands were dull at best. And to be completely fair to the guy, he did run through the competition up until this point, and even the tourney sponsor saw him as a dark horse that could potentially win it all. That changed when Guts stepped onto the field and sweet-talked his way into a match with Silat. The Black Swordsman had been observing the Eastern Warrior's movements throughout his entire fight with Valencia, and he wasn't too impressed with what he saw. As far as Guts was concerned, Silat was a circus performer dancing with weapons, and he proved that by beating him with far more ease than he did Valencia. For all his nimble movements and fighting prowess, Silat was a man consumed by his ego. He was calling Western swordplay narrow-minded a few moments ago, but he proved his own short-sightedness when he asked Guts to take his stance. Silat was clearly here to put on a show and stroke his own ego, so when Guts just told him to come at him, his mind went into overdrive. He started over-analyzing the moves Guts was going to make, without even considering that he was laying out his own strategy in front of the opponent. It took Guts a grand total of one strike to end Silat's circus performance. The Eastern Warrior went in with a few well-placed jabs to Guts' head as an opener. Guts was too fast for him though, as he kept dodging each strike, which made Silat increasingly frustrated. He switched tactics and decided to use small daggers concealed in his boots to distract Guts. Silat kicked him with both legs in such a way that both of Guts' hands were tied up. He created an opening for himself that he was sure would guarantee him victory, but Guts was much quicker on the draw. With one swift motion, he unsheathed his sword and thwacked Silat aside like a fly. The Eastern Warrior barreled into the fences and then threw them, making Guts' victory clear as day. You can just sense the immense progress Guts has made with this fight because the one right before it, his final showdown with Griffith as a human, saw him take a stance before they clashed. During the year Guts spent training near Godot's cabin, he grew accustomed to splitting open dozens of logs as they fell towards him from the top of a waterfall. To say that he's now capable of drawing his sword within the blink of an eye is an understatement. When it comes to the result of Guts versus Silat round 1, Guts wins out of pure strength and skill. Not to say that Silat wasn't skilled, because he would give anyone that isn't on Guts' level a run for their money, but he wasn't at Guts' level himself, at least not at this point in the story. But he does get a rare opportunity for anyone that crosses swords with Guts, an instant rematch. Guts versus Silat round 2, a prince humbled by the power of pure skill. Guts didn't have a lot of time to reflect on his easy victory over Silat because he learnt soon after that his former comrades had now become outlaws. Little did he know that their paths would cross again, and so soon after their last encounter. He didn't know this, of course, but while Guts was off training in the mountains, the Falcons had been on the run from nearly 70% of Midland's entire military strength. The only reason they had been able to survive was because of Casca, and word about unusual things like a disgraced former mercenary band being led by a woman tends to spread like wildfire in the world of Berserk. Naturally, there are many in the world who think of such groups as easy targets, given it's a group of men being led by a woman, but there are others who recognize the skill and commitment it takes to accomplish such a feat and want to test themselves against it. Silat falls into the latter category. After losing to Guts, he must have overheard the tourney sponsor talking about the Band of the Falcon, and he decided to give himself a personal redemption arc. Silat gathered a bunch of mercenaries and launched a sneak attack on the band. He immediately identified Casca as the leader and challenged her to a fight. To her credit, Casca was running on fumes and was about to crash before Silat and her boys arrived, which jolted her back into action. But it was clear that she wasn't able to keep up with the Kushan warriors' unconventional moves. After a brief yet hotly contested exchange, Silat managed to pin Casca to the ground, and he entreated her to give up willingly. He said that he would give her a 3 count, but a voice from behind him called out 4 after he was done and booted him off Casca in a panel straight out of a gag manga. That's right, folks. Guts had tracked the Falcons down as well, and an unintended byproduct of this reunion was round 2 between himself and Silat. Once he realized Guts' connection to the band, he realized the man's true identity, and now it was his turn to give credit where it was due. The Baki Raka clan had been active in the Western Hemisphere for centuries as assassins and elite warriors for hire. They were privy to all sorts of information, especially when it came to warfare. This might have been Silat's first time out in the West, but even he was aware of the tales of battles emanating from that land. And he too had heard tell of the 100-man Slayer. Silat acknowledged the toughness of the former raider captain of the Falcons and considered the scenario a golden opportunity to wash off the disgrace of the arms tournament. He wasn't playing around either, because he switches up his fighting style to show that he was really serious about this fight. Silat uses projectiles and a malleable sword to try and throw Guts off his game, and if it was anyone else, like Judo or Casca, it might have worked. His chakram, for instance, are essentially flying discs of death. If they find their way into your flesh, they'll cut straight through it with 0 resistance. He killed a Falcon that was on guard duty to begin his raid using his chakram chakram to demonstrate that fact. But with Guts, these things might as well have been ring tossing at the fair. He was able to accurately gauge the trajectory of Silat's curving chakram and catch them both, one with his sword and the other with his finger. Guts mockingly threw them back at Silat, which made the Bakiraka prince draw out his ultimate equalizer, the Urumi. This thin, multi-bladed sword looks more like a flail if we're being honest, but trust us when we say it is a sword. An Urumi has 5 razor-sharp, paper-thin blades that cut like a weasel's scratch and can wrap themselves around an enemy easily, killing them by stripping the flesh off their bodies. Silat dual wields Urumis against Guts to increase his chances of victory, and for the first time in their rivalry, he actually has the Black Swordsman on the back foot. When Guts first encounters the Urumi, all he does is try to run from it, and he ends up getting several cuts all over his body because of it. He acknowledges the fact that they do cut like a weasel's scratches, but when he sees one of his former comrades die after getting tangled in them, he decides to put an end to the fight. Guts firmly plants himself and the tip of his sword in the ground because he realizes that he has to find a way to neuter Silat's Urumi, and regular blocking and parrying wasn't going to cut it. The guy Silat had killed had full plate armor on, and he still died. Guts was half armored at best, so if he tried to parry or block, chances were he'd get caught up in the other pair of Urumi that Silat was wielding. Guts made the mistake of pointing out to Silat that had he overwhelmed him with 5 chakrams instead of 2, he'd have had a tougher time dodging them. The Bakiraka prince adapted and brought 10 blades that cracked like thunder down on him, thinking Guts had resigned himself to his fate clearly. He didn't anticipate that the swordsman would use opposing forces to stall his blade's momentum. Guts leveraged and moved his blade in such a way that it generated tremendous air pressure, making the Urumis coming towards him fizzle out like streamer ribbons. He then went in for the kill, but Silat was smart enough to switch to his katars in order to block what would have been a lethal blow. This moment is what made Guts finally acknowledge the fact that Silat has some skill as a fighter after all, because he calls his switcheroo not too shabby. But to the Bakiraka prince, this is a tremendous blow to his ego. Silat calls Guts a cur for insulting him like that and giving him a forehead wound to boot. He departs the scene telling Guts he would remember his name, but turns out it wasn't to exact revenge on him for this double humiliation. Silat got his butt handed to him by the same dude twice in the space of a few hours, and he was supposed to be the young master of the Bakiraka clan, a clan made up of assassins, a clan that supposedly bred warriors. Guts would go on to face a few other Bakiraka clansmen during the course of Griffith's rescue mission, but none of them posed a real threat to him or his fellow Falcons. The truth was, Silat was out of touch. His ego and arrogance are traits well known within his community, but because he was the son of their master, none dared question his attitude. Silat's habit of telegraphing his intentions came from this sense of arrogance. He used to think that there was no breaking his unique fighting style until it got broken twice by Guts. This forced him to reconsider everything he had done in his life as a warrior, and for the first time in his life, Silat humbled himself and resumed his training. He became wiser, more cautious, less haughty and aggressive. That chip on his shoulder was replaced by a sense of maturity, and Silat learned the true taste of strength when he started putting in the work again. His awareness of a person's battle potential increased exponentially after facing such a strong adversary, because when the Kushan invaded Midland, he ordered the closest men not to engage Guts directly in combat. Though the Black Swordsman was cutting down Kushan scouts left, right, and center, Silat told his Tapasa that if they were to fight Guts then and there, they would not be able to win without grave losses. The quartet puts 2 and 2 together, realizing that this was the man who gave their young master that forehead scar he hates so much. 2 back-to-back defeats taught Silat the importance of constantly honing his skills, and it is with that frame of reference that we'll be diving into the next section of this video. Guts vs. Silat, Round 3. The Black Beast vs. the Kushan Prince. Will it happen? The next time Guts and Silat come across each other, their circumstances have changed considerably. Where Guts was a knight on peregrination during their first encounter, he was now a bona fide apostle hunter. Silat had gone from being an arrogant princeling to a true leader of men who was willing to make compromises for the sake of his people. That was the reason he chose to align with the Dread Emperor Ganishka in the Kushan Empire's invasion of Midland, because he'd hoped he'd be able to restore his clan to their homeland. Silat and his Bakiraka were assigned with the task of finding the Falcon of Oracle and bringing him to Ganishka, which is why his Kushan scouts were working overtime in Midland. Silat holds back his Tapasa the first time he sees Guts, but the second time he sends them after him. Not because he changes his mind about being careful, no, it's because Griffith is incarnated in the physical world at that moment. Guts just happens to get caught up in the commotion. Once Griffith flies away with Zod, the Kushan turned on the Midlanders in their vicinity, and Guts had to escape with Casca. Neither man touched each other, but the standoff left much to be desired, especially considering the growth Silat had had in the years he hadn't seen Guts. After the incarnation ceremony, Silat headed off to the siege of Shet and immediately showed us his progress by catching an arrow fired from behind him. But the true testament to his growth was his battle with the Apostle Rakshas in the city of Falconia. After pimp-slapping Griffith across the face, Rickert became public enemy number 1 for the Falcons' War Demon squad, but he also became a person of interest to a silent observer of everything that had been happening since the Great Roar of the astral world, Silat. After witnessing Ganishka's heinous crimes against humanity and his true nature as a demonic apostle, Silat became disillusioned with the Kushan cause. Instead of continuing his pledge of loyalty, he decided he would see the world that was to come and determine his people's place within it after observing it for a while. Turns out, he didn't like what he saw because he snuck into the Falcon's palace, ostensibly to find a way to assassinate Griffith. Instead, he saw Rickert lay the smackdown on him and became intrigued by this young man. He decided to pursue him in order to learn whatever secret he so clearly knew about the Falcon, but in the process, he came across an old adversary, Rakshas. The Kushan apostle was a Bakiraka in his previous human life, but he was banished from the clan because of his disconcerting love for his job. The duty of a Bakiraka is to kill without emotion. They were a warrior clan, bred for the field, but since being banished and exiled, they made their bread through killing. However, their moral codes forbade them from turning killing into an act of enjoyment. The Bakiraka kill solely to fulfill their duty as hired killers, or at least that's how it's supposed to be. Rakshas was a twisted man before he became a sentient robe, because he took pleasure in toying with his targets. That's why he was kicked out of the clan, but clearly his sadism wasn't going anywhere. Rakshas became an apostle and was the one who engaged Silat at Shet when Griffith arrived. Back then, the two fought to a stalemate of sorts because Silat had to skedaddle, but in Falconia, they had 2 proper exchanges which provably demonstrate Salat's progress. The first is when Silat saves Rickert from a Rakshas ambush. Someone puts Rakshas up to assassinating Rickert because, need we remind you, he pimp-slapped the shit out of Griffith. So the Kushan apostle takes up the offer happily because there's nothing he enjoys more than killing people. He creeps up on Rickert and tells him to think about his family fondly because it's the last time he'll be doing that when 2 chakram fly in his direction. Silat keeps up the pressure by attacking the boulder Rakshas shelters himself within, and with the help of his tapasa, he manages to split Rakshas's mask in half. But that's just the thing. Silat only gets the apostle's mask. Rakshas can manipulate his body in such a way that his head isn't necessarily where his mask is. He uses this fluidity to escape Silat and the tapasa tying his limbs down. He can also manipulate said limbs to do all sorts of things, like restrain targets, turn them into weapons, and fight with them, obviously, so you can see how versatile this guy is in the field. But he does have a weakness to fire, and Silat and the gang exploit the hell out of that. Silat himself is crucial in that aspect because he gets the unenviable job of tying down Rakshas long enough for Rickert's medieval flamethrower to make it onto the scene. Silat starts off by drawing Rakshas's attention with the Urumi and goes into his familiar taunting pattern, but this time, there's an earned sense of righteousness in his voice. He uses his Urumi to cover the inside of the entire area enclosed by Rickert's firecrackers to force Rakshas to attack with his main body. When he does that, Silat counters by attacking him with a small projectile that he holds between his toes. He has ditched the switchblade boots in favor of this more traditional fighting style, but it gets him better results because Silat manages to catch Rakshas in the face. The apostle tries to get his own back by tying up Salat's Urumi with his robes and then bum rushing him, but he ends up being met by the Bakiraka prince's Katars. The exchange that follows is so intense that it forces Rakshas to accept the growth Silat was exhibiting in this moment as a man and as a warrior. Silat acknowledges Guts' influence on him, though he doesn't name him, and this is about where their fight ends, or at least the melee part of it. After Silat lands a hit on Rakshas, his tapasa blasts the guy and that aforementioned flamethrower, and then he kidnaps Erica as a hostage, and then Daiba comes in to save the day and fly all of them off towards Kushan lands, but not before blowing up Rakshas with the prototype RPG. Look it up, we're serious, we're not even kidding. But what does all of this have to do with Guts vs. Silat round 3? Well, it wouldn't have had anything to do with that had they not been fated by causality to meet again. And meet again they do in the latest chapter of Berserk, albeit the circumstances are tenuous at best. A lot has happened since Silat last saw Guts. For starters, the latter is dying faster and faster with each passing day. That isn't even a joke, the Berserker armor is literally killing him with every use. But Silat hasn't been a quiet boy either. After returning home, he became the leader of the remnants of the Kushan Empire and appointed Daiba as his primary advisor. It's thanks to one of the old sorcerer's visions that they reunited with Guts, though like we said, the circumstances of their meeting are tenuous at best. You see, Guts isn't exactly in a good place right now. He's losing his mind just a little bit because Griffith stole his girl, he can't get either of his swords up, and his inner beast of darkness keeps asking him to let it in. In fact, Daiba's prophecy referred to him as the Black Beast, and it was a pleasant shock to everyone present that Guts didn't put up any resistance to the Kushan sailors boarding the Seahorse. When Silat realized who they were sent to recover, he doubted whether any of them would have been able to do anything if Guts went berserk, but we think he's not giving himself the credit he deserves here. Silat has come a long long way as a fighter. He's improved his skills to the point where he can hurt apostles of the most idiosyncratic kinds. His fight with Rakshas alone is proof that he can hang with Guts if they went at it seriously. But the real question is, who would win? Well, we suppose that answer depends on the conditions. If we're talking about Berserker Guts, then Silat has no chance. That dude shocked Grunbeld back into his shoes. Silat is a mere human. But if the two were to have a hand-to-hand fight, like a solo repeat of their first fight, we can guarantee you that Guts won't have nearly as easy of a time beating Silat. Those L's humbled our bro to the point that he can now kill you while schooling you with kindness, and that's kinda crazy when you think about it. If we're talking pure power, Guts wins out any day, but Silat's technique has improved a lot since their last fight, and besides, we want to get a W in his column too. To prepare for war, one has to train, and now that Silat and Guts are on the same page, maybe we get round 3 during a training session. We highly doubt Guts would even be able to move properly without at least wearing the Berserker armor, but once he gets functional, we don't think Silat has a single chance against him. As much as the Bakiraka Prince has improved, Guts is still just built different, and Silat has acknowledged this already. Still, come on, a fight between them at this stage in the story? Don't threaten us with a good time. And speaking of good times, marvelous verdict! We're gonna have to do the opposite to you, because that's all we've got for this video. Guts vs. Silat is one of those pure martial arts rivalries that you don't see a lot of these days. Let us know what you guys think about the rivalry and a potential round 3 in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep on struggling, strugglers.